Take a deep breath. Close your eyes for a moment. If you're somewhere safe to do so, picture the United States of America, not the America of politics or headlines, but the real America, the one made of small towns and big cities, of cornfields and coastlines, of coffee shops and church parking lots, of school buses rumbling down country roads at 7 in the morning while the sun is still deciding whether it wants to show up. Picture the America where people hold doors open for strangers, where neighbors bring casseroles when someone is sick, where a child can make a lemonade stand on a hot July afternoon, and the whole neighborhood shows up not because they're thirsty, but because they want to see that little face light up. That's the America this story lives in. And today, we follow a thread, a single golden thread of kindness that stretches from the cold plains of Minnesota all the way down to the warm waters of the Florida Gulf Coast. A thread that connects strangers who will never meet, children who will grow into remarkable people, and ordinary men and women who, on perfectly ordinary days, chose to do one extraordinary thing. Are you ready? Then let's begin. The temperature in Duluth, Minnesota had dropped to 11 degrees overnight, and by the time Marvella Hutchins stepped out her front door at 5:47 in the morning, the cold hit her face like a wall made of pure winter. Marvella was 62 years old, with silver-streaked locks wrapped in a wool hat her granddaughter had knitted 2 Christmases ago. She worked the early shift at a diner called a Harbor Spoon, a little blue-painted place right at the edge of Lake Superior, where the fishermen and the dock workers came in before the rest of the world woke up. She'd worked there for 18 years. Every single morning, she walked 12 blocks because her car, a 2003 Pontiac with a heater that hadn't worked since Obama's first term, was too cold to start in November. She didn't complain about it. She wore her layers. She walked fast. She knew the cracks in every sidewalk on Maple Street by heart. That morning, though, something was different. On the corner of Maple and Fifth, she passed a boy sitting on a bus stop bench. He couldn't have been more than 13 or 14 years old. He was wearing a thin hoodie, gray, with a small rip at the shoulder. No hat, no gloves. His arms were wrapped around himself, and he was shivering so hard his teeth were chattering loud enough that Marvella could hear them from 10 feet away. She stopped. "Baby," she said, "where's your coat?" The boy looked up. His name was Darius Cole. He had wide brown eyes and a small scar above his left eyebrow from a bicycle accident when he was 8. He didn't say anything at first. He just stared at her with the kind of blank, tired look that children get when they've been carrying something heavy for too long. "Forgot it," he finally said. Quietly, Marvella looked at him for a long moment. She could feel the cold cutting through even her double layers. She thought about being late to work. She thought about Mr. Pinsky, her manager, who kept a clipboard and wrote things down. Then she thought about her own son at 13, how boys that age were always cold, always hungry, always too proud to ask for help. She unwrapped the wool scarf from around her neck, the long burgundy one her sister had sent from Atlanta, and she stepped toward Darius and wrapped it around him, twice. "Don't argue," she said, before he could open his mouth. He blinked. "I can't take your scarf." "You're not taking it. I'm giving it. There's a difference, and someday you'll understand that." She tucked the end of the scarf under itself so the wind wouldn't pull it loose. "How long have you been sitting here?" "Since 4:30, he said. She didn't ask why. She could guess. She'd seen enough of the world to know that a 14-year-old boy sitting alone in 11-degree weather at 4:30 in the morning wasn't there by choice. "You hungry?" she asked. He nodded, small and honest. "Come on, then." She walked him the remaining 8 blocks to the Harbor Spoon. She was 7 minutes late. Mr. Pinsky made a note on his clipboard. She smiled at him and went straight to the kitchen and made Darius a plate of scrambled eggs, 2 pieces of whole wheat toast with real butter, a cup of hot chocolate, extra marshmallows, and a side of hash browns that she crisped up exactly the way her grandmother used to make them, pressed flat and golden at the edges. She sat him in the booth nearest the heating vent and brought him his food. "Eat slow," she told him. "When you're this cold, fast food hurts." He ate. He didn't say much. But when he finished, he looked up at her with those wide brown eyes and said, "Thank you, ma'am." Marvella nodded. You got somewhere to be today? He said he had school. She said good. She wrote her phone number on a paper napkin, the harbor spoon kind, the thick white ones, and slid across the table to him. If you ever need a hot meal, she said, you come find me. My name's Marvella. He folded the napkin carefully and put it in his hoodie pocket. Then he walked to school. What Marvella didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Darius Cole would carry that napkin in his wallet for the next 11 years. He never called the number. He never needed to. But he kept it, not because he needed rescuing. Because on the coldest morning of his young life, a stranger saw him, truly saw him, and chose not to walk past. That mattered. More than she would ever know, it mattered. 3 months later, in 1,000 miles south, a woman named Cecily Pratt was standing in the self-help aisle of a used bookstore on Charlotte Avenue in Nashville, trying very hard not to cry. She was 38 years old. She had a master's degree in educational psychology, a collection of 47 houseplants that she had named every single one of, and a marriage that had ended 6 weeks ago when her husband of 9 years told her, quietly and without drama, that he didn't think they were right for each other anymore. She wasn't sure what she was looking for in the bookstore. She just knew she couldn't be in her apartment anymore that afternoon. So she'd driven to the bookstore because bookstores were the one place she always felt like herself. Even when she didn't know who that was, she pulled a book off the shelf. Read the back, put it back, pulled another, read the first page, put it back. She was on her 4th book when a small voice in the next aisle over said, very clearly, Daddy, that lady is sad. Cecily froze. She heard a man's voice, low, gentle, say, "Shoo, sweetheart, we don't say things like that." But I asked, Daddy. Her face looks like Grandma's face after Grandpa went to heaven. A long pause. Then, from around the corner of the bookshelf, a small hand appeared. Attached to the hand was a girl, maybe 5 years old, with 2 braids and a purple coat and the most direct pair of eyes Cecily had ever seen in her life. Behind her came a man, late 30s, glasses, flannel shirt, looking like he was simultaneously mortified and trying not to laugh. I'm so sorry, he said to Cecily. She says exactly what she thinks. We're working on it. It's okay, Cecily said. She meant to say it normally, but it came out a little wobbly. The little girl, her name was Rosalind, though she went by Roz, stepped forward and held something out to Cecily. It was a sticker, a small, shiny sticker of a rainbow with a sunshine at one end. I got this from the dentist, Roz said gravely, and I was saving it, but I think you need it more. Cecily looked down at the sticker in the little girl's palm. Something cracked open in her chest, not painfully, but the way a window cracks open in spring. And suddenly fresh air is moving through a room that hadn't breathed in months. She took the sticker. Thank you, she whispered. This is the best gift I've gotten in a long time. Roz nodded, satisfied, like a doctor who had just prescribed exactly the right medicine. Her father, his name was Thomas Pruitt, and he'd been a widower for 3 years, looked at Cecily and said, Can I buy you a coffee? There's a cafe 2 doors down. You don't have to talk about anything. We can just sit and be people. She thought about saying no. She said yes. They sat for 2 hours. They talked about books, about Nashville in winter, about his daughter, who had inherited her late mother's habit of announcing the emotional truth of every room she walked into, about Cecily's houseplants, every one of which she described in enough detail that Thomas laughed until his glasses fogged up. They did not talk about her divorce. They did not talk about his wife. They were just 2 people being people. When they said goodbye in the parking lot, Roz hugged Cecily around the knees and said, You should smile more. Your smile is really nice. Cecily drove home and stuck the rainbow sticker on her bathroom mirror. She looked at it every morning for the next 3 years. Thomas and Cecily would see each other again, as it happened, at a mutual friend's barbecue the following July. But that is a different story, and it belongs to them. What belongs to us is this moment. A 5-year-old girl who had been taught by grief to pay attention to other people's grief, and who chose, without hesitation, to give away her best sticker. Because when you've lost something precious, you understand what it means to be seen. In Portland, Oregon, at the corner of a city park that most people cut through on their lunch break without really looking at, there was a bench. It was a green-painted wooden bench, a little weathered, with a small bronze plaque screwed into the back of it that read, "For those who served and those who sit with them." Nobody knew who had put the plaque there. It had appeared one morning in 2019, and the Parks Department had decided it was nice enough to leave alone. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, a man named Gerald Kowalczyk sat on that bench from noon until 2 o'clock. He was 71 years old, a Vietnam-era veteran, and he had a quiet and calming way of just existing in space that made other people want to sit nearby. He never asked anyone to sit with him. He just sat. He read his newspaper. He fed the pigeons with bread heels from his jacket pocket. People came and went. Some stopped, some didn't. But over the years, Gerald had become something the neighborhood couldn't quite name, but couldn't quite do without either. On a gray Thursday in March, a young man named Alonzo Tran, 26 years old, recently discharged from the Army, struggling in ways he couldn't explain to his family, sat down next to Gerald. He didn't mean to. He just needed somewhere to stop walking, and the bench was there. Gerald didn't say anything at first. He just folded his newspaper to the crossword section and started filling in answers. He had a mechanical pencil. He used it lightly, like a man who didn't mind being wrong. 5 minutes passed. 3 down is persevere, Alonzo said, without meaning to. Gerald looked at his puzzle, counted the boxes, penciled it in. "So it is," he said. "Thank you." Another 5 minutes. "You a veteran?" Gerald asked. "Yeah," Alonzo said. "Recent?" 8 months out. Gerald nodded slowly, like that explained everything that didn't need explaining. "Hard stretch," he said. "Not a question." "Yeah." "Does it feel like nobody speaks the same language anymore?" Alonzo turned to look at him. "Yeah, exactly like that." Gerald set his crossword down. "I sat on a bench very much like this one in 1975, he said. Different city, same feeling, like I'd come back from somewhere. And everyone else had kept going. And now we were all standing in the same room, but I was 3 steps behind and couldn't catch up." Alonzo was quiet. "Does it get better?" he asked. Gerald considered this the way a man considers something he's thought about for many decades and still doesn't have a perfect answer to. "It gets different," he said finally. "Different is its own kind of better in time." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a card, plain white, with a phone number handwritten on it in blue ink. "That's the number for a men's group I run on Monday nights. Veterans, mostly. Some not. We meet at the church on Burnside, the one with the blue door. We eat bad pizza and we talk." He paused. "Or we don't talk. Some guys just come for the pizza." Alonzo took the card. He showed up the following Monday. He'd later say it was the first time in 8 months he'd sat in a room and felt like the people around him understood the shape of the silence he was carrying. Gerald never considered himself a healer. He thought of himself as a man who sat on a bench and had good crossword answers. But that is often how healing finds its way in, not through drama or ceremony, but through one person deciding to simply be present, to stay in the chair, to not walk away from the discomfort of another human being's grief. The elementary school in the South Valley neighborhood of Albuquerque was called Bright Futures Elementary, and it had a teacher named Miss Dolores Ramirez who had been teaching 4th grade for 23 years. She was the kind of teacher that children remember for the rest of their lives, not because she gave extra credit or threw candy for correct answers, though she did sometimes keep a jar of hard butterscotch candies on her desk, available to anyone who looked like they needed one. She was memorable because she paid attention, because she knew which children needed to be called on and which ones needed to be quietly left alone on hard mornings, because she could tell by the way a child walked through her door what kind of night they'd had. April was always a busy month in room 14. State testing was approaching. The school was in a community where many families were working multiple jobs, and the pressure of those tests fell on children's shoulders in ways that weren't always fair. That April, Dolores noticed that one of her students, a girl named Priscilla Fuentes, had stopped talking, not in a dramatic way. Priscilla wasn't disruptive or withdrawn in any obvious sense. She just stopped raising her hand, stopped writing in her journal with the enthusiasm she'd had all year. Her work was still neat. Her homework was still completed. But something behind her eyes had gone quiet. Dolores didn't make a scene of it. She didn't call Priscilla to the front of the class or make an announcement. She just started leaving small things on Priscilla's desk. On Monday, a sticky note that said, "Your essay last week was one of the most creative things I've read in years. I mean that." On Wednesday, a library book about a girl who loved astronomy, because Priscilla had mentioned once, back in September, that she wanted to work for NASA someday. On Friday, a small notebook, purple, with a galaxy on the cover, and a note tucked inside that read, "This is for your big ideas. You have more than you know." Priscilla didn't say anything about any of it, but the following Monday, she raised her hand during science class for the first time in 3 weeks. Later that month, Dolores received a handmade card slid under the door of her classroom. Inside, in careful, deliberate 9-year-old handwriting, it read, "Dear Miss Ramirez, thank you for noticing. I didn't think anyone could tell. I am going to work really hard now. Love, Priscilla." Dolores kept that card pinned above her desk until the day she retired, 12 years later. She kept it because it was a reminder she needed. On the hard days, on the exhausting days, on the days when she wondered if it all mattered, that noticing someone is an act of love, that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is simply pay attention. Highway 56 in central Kansas stretches across the flattest land on earth, or so it seems to people who drive it. The sky is enormous there. The wheat fields roll to the horizon in every direction, and on a clear May afternoon, you can see weather coming from 40 miles away like a slow announcement. Marcus Dewey was 34 years old, a truck driver from Wichita, and he'd been running this route for 6 years. He knew every gas station, every cattle crossing, every stretch of road where the radio went to static. He also had a habit, something he didn't tell most people about. Every time he stopped for fuel or food, he paid for the order of the person behind him in line. Not always. Sometimes there wasn't anyone behind him. Sometimes the person behind him was ordering for a whole family, and Marcus was on a budget. He wasn't wealthy, not even close, and he'd buy a coffee for the person behind him instead of their full order. But he did it when he could. He'd started the habit 6 years ago, right after his mother passed away. She'd been the kind of woman who was always doing small things for people, leaving extra change in parking meters, buying a second sandwich and giving it to whoever looked hungry. She used to say, "Marcus, the world is a relay race. You just run your piece." He ran his piece. On a Tuesday in May, he stopped at a small gas station diner in a town called Bison, population 191, and he bought his usual black coffee, a BLT, and a bag of chips. The woman behind him was ordering with shaking hands and counting out quarters on the counter. Her name was Renata Shields, and she'd driven from Dodge City with her 2 daughters because her sister had been hospitalized in Salina, and she'd left the house in such a hurry that she grabbed her purse but forgotten her wallet except for the change in the bottom. She was ordering 1 small coffee and 2 children's hot chocolates, and she had $7.41 to her name until she could figure out something. Marcus tapped the counter. All three of those are on me, he said to the cashier. And whatever they want to eat. Renata looked up. Her eyes were red from the drive and the worry. You don't have to do that, she said. I know, Marcus said. My mama told me to, though. He smiled. She was very persuasive. Renata fed her daughters grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, the lunch special. She ate a ham and cheese melt herself. Marcus sat at the counter with his BLT, and they didn't talk much, but he told her the hospital in Salina had good doctors. He knew this because he'd driven past it for 6 years, and it always looked like a place that was working hard at something. She thanked him when they left. He waved. He got back on Highway 56 and drove. In the back seat of Renata's car, her older daughter, Maya, who was 11, asked her mother who the man at the diner was. A kind stranger, Renata said. Will we ever see him again? Probably not. Maya looked out the window at the flat Kansas plain rolling past. That's kind of sad, she said. Renata thought about it. Or maybe it's beautiful, she said. He didn't do it to see us again. He did it just because. Maya was quiet for a while. Then she said, I want to do things just because when I grow up. Then you will, her mother said. And she did. If you saw Rodrigo Big Rod Espinosa coming down the interstate on his motorcycle, you would probably grip your steering wheel a little tighter. Not because he was doing anything wrong. He never was. But because Big Rod was the kind of man who commanded attention without asking for it. 6 feet 3 inches tall, 240 pounds of solid presence, with a silver streak beard that reached his collar, forearms covered in the kind of tattoos that told the story of a life lived loudly, and a custom black Harley-Davidson Road King that rumbled so deep you felt it in your chest before you heard it with your ears. He wore a leather cut, a vest with patches that marked him as a road captain for the Iron Compass Riders, a motorcycle club out of San Antonio. The club did charity toy drives every Christmas and visited children's hospitals on the weekends. Their motto, stitched in red thread on the back of every vest, read, Ride with Purpose. Big Rod took that seriously. He was 53 years old. He'd worked in construction for 20 years, saved every dollar he could, and now ran a small custom auto shop called Espinosa's Iron Chrome on the west side of San Antonio. He had 3 adult children who called him every Sunday, 2 grandchildren who called him Abuelo Roddy, and a reputation in his neighborhood as the man you call when something was broken, a fence, a car, a person, because Big Rod would show up and he would fix it, or he would sit with it until something shifted. On a sweltering Tuesday morning in June, he was cruising back to San Antonio on Interstate 10 after dropping off a friend's restored motorcycle in Kerrville, a beautiful 1978 shovelhead that had taken 6 months to bring back from near ruin. When he spotted a car on the right shoulder with its hazard lights flashing, he pulled over. He always pulled over. It was a rule he'd made for himself 20 years ago, after breaking down on a rural highway outside Laredo at midnight, and waiting 4 hours for anyone to stop. He'd promised himself then, if I am ever on the other side of this, I stop. The car was a faded blue Honda Civic with a front tire blown completely apart. Not just flat, but shredded, the rubber hanging off the rim in strips. Standing beside it was a young woman named Imani Jefferson. She was 22 years old, in nursing scrubs, teal blue, with small cartoon cats on them. And she was on the phone with someone, her voice tight and controlled in a way that people speak when they are trying not to panic. She was saying, I know, Mama, I know. I'm fine. I don't know how to change a tire. I know I should learn. I know. She looked up and saw Big Rod pulling his Harley to a stop behind her car, and her face did something complicated. Something that was trying very hard to be okay. He killed the engine. He took off his helmet. He held up one hand, palm out, in a universal gesture that means, I am not here to cause trouble. I am here to help. You need a hand with that tire? He said. She looked at the blown tire. She looked at him. She said into the phone, Mama, there's a man on a motorcycle. I think he's going to help me. A pause. I'll call you back. Yes, I'll stay on the main road. Mama, I'll call you back. She put her phone in her pocket. I have a spare, she said carefully, but I've never changed a tire before. I have, he said, about 400 times. He wasn't exaggerating by much. He opened his saddlebag. He always carried a small socket set, a collapsible torque wrench, and a pair of work gloves, because Big Rod believed in being prepared the way some people believed in prayer. And he got to work. He changed the tire in 11 minutes flat. He did it slowly enough that Imani could watch, and he narrated every step. Loosen the lug nuts before you jack it up, not after, he said, demonstrating. A lot of people get that backwards, and then the wheel just spins on them. She watched. She asked questions. He answered every one without impatience. Why do you know how to do all this? She asked, while he was torquing the last lug nut. My father taught me, he said. He said a man who can't fix things has to depend on the world being kind to him all the time. Better be able to fix things yourself, and then be kind to the world anyway. She was quiet for a moment. That's a good philosophy, she said. He was a good man. He stood, dusted off his knees, and handed her the ruined tire, the kind of gesture that meant, here, take what's yours, I haven't kept anything, and he said, you need to get that spare swapped out for a real tire as soon as you can. Spares aren't meant for the highway. I will, she said. There's a shop in San Antonio I've been meaning to go to anyway. He reached into his vest pocket, the inside one, where he kept his business cards, and pulled one out. Espinosa's Iron and Chrome, she read. Custom auto? We do regular too, he said. Tell whoever's at the desk that Roddy sent you. They'll give you a fair price. She looked at the card, then at him, then at the Harley, gleaming black in the Texas morning sun. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. Does it bother you when people see you coming and they get scared? Because you look... She hesitated, choosing words. He smiled. It was a very large, very warm smile that changed his whole face. Intimidating, he offered. I was going to say intense, she said. He laughed, a big, rolling laugh that bounced off the highway overpasses. Used to, he said when he'd settled. When I was younger, it ate at me. You spend your whole life knowing people are judging the cover before they even pick up the book. He shrugged. Then I figured, the people who stay long enough to read the first page, those are my people. The rest are just passing through. He put his helmet back on. You have a safe drive now, miss. Imani, she said. Imani Jefferson. You have a safe drive, Miss Imani. Get that spare swapped. Yes, sir, she said, and she meant the sir. He pulled back onto the interstate. She watched until his red taillights were small and then gone, swallowed by the heat shimmer of the Texas highway. She called her mother back. He was the kindest man, she told her. He looked like someone you'd see in a movie and be scared of, and he was the kindest man. Her mother said, that's why the Lord tells us not to judge by appearances, baby. Imani drove to San Antonio. She got the spare replaced at Espinosa's Iron and Chrome. The man at the desk, a younger guy named Tomas, who had the same dark eyes as the man on the highway, said, You know Roddy? I met him this morning, she said. He changed my tire on the side of I-10. Tomas nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. That sounds like him. He gave her the tire at cost. 3 months later, Imani graduated from her nursing program. In the section of her graduation speech where she was asked to name someone who had shaped her final year, she talked about the unexpected teachers in her life. And she included a man on a black Harley on the side of an interstate who had changed her tire and her thinking in the same 11 minutes. He taught me, she said, that the people who show up for you are often the people you least expected, and that we spend so much time being afraid of what we don't recognize, when maybe what we should be doing is staying long enough to read the first page. She still has his business card. It's tucked inside her nursing badge holder. The Woodlawn neighborhood on the south side of Chicago had a branch library that stayed open until 8 o'clock on Tuesday evenings, and for 3 summers in a row, a man named Bernard Ose had run a free tutoring program in the back reading room from 5 to 7:30. Bernard was 45 years old, a high school math teacher during the school year, and he gave up his Tuesday evenings all summer long, because 17 years ago, A woman named Mrs. Patrice Aldridge had tutored him through calculus in the back of a library exactly like this one, and he had promised himself then, at the age of 28, desperate and failing and full of shame, that if he ever got to the other side of hard, he would pull someone else through. He kept his promise every summer. The kids who came to Bernard's Tuesday program ranged from 10 to 19 years old. Some came because their parents sent them. Some came because they'd heard you got snacks. And Bernard did provide snacks, usually goldfish crackers and juice boxes, because he believed that brains worked better when they weren't hungry. Some came because they were lost in math the way Bernard had once been, and they needed someone to show them that it wasn't about being smart. It was about being willing to try again. On a Tuesday evening in late June, a 15-year-old named Jalen Okafor sat across from Bernard with a sheet of algebra problems that might as well have been written in an alien language. Jalen was quiet, proud, the kind of teenager who would rather fail silently than ask for help loudly. Bernard recognized this immediately because he had been this exact teenager. "Show me what you've tried," Bernard said. "I haven't tried anything," Jalen said. "I don't know where to start." "Then let's start with what you do know," Bernard said. "You know what an equal sign means, right?" Jalen blinked. "Yeah." "Then you already know the most important thing. An equation is a promise. It says these two things are the same. Our whole job is to figure out what one side is hiding." Something shifted in Jalen's expression. Small but real. "What one side is hiding," he repeated. "Exactly." Bernard tapped the paper. "Algebra is detective work. You already know how to think. Let's just teach your thinking to look in the right direction." They worked for 2 hours. At the end of the session, Jalen had solved 11 of the 15 problems on his own. He stared at his own work like he couldn't quite believe it was his. "How did you learn to teach like that?" he asked Bernard. "Someone taught me how," Bernard said, "and they learned it from someone else. That's all it is. We're just passing the light forward." Jalen came back the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. He passed algebra that fall with a B+. He called it the hardest thing he'd ever done, and the thing he was most proud of. On a corner in the east side of Detroit that had been an abandoned lot for 11 years, there was now a garden. It had begun with a woman named Clara Beaumont, who was 67 years old and had decided that she was tired of looking at a lot full of broken glass and ragweed. She called the city, filled out the right forms, and on a Saturday in early spring 4 years ago, she'd shown up with a shovel. She hadn't expected anyone else to come, but her neighbor Daryl had seen her from his porch and brought his wheelbarrow. And Daryl's teenage son Malik had come out of pure curiosity and stayed, because it turned out he liked the feeling of moving dirt. And from across the street came the Nguyen's, a family of 5 who'd moved from Vietnam to Detroit 17 years ago and had been growing herbs on their apartment balcony ever since, dreaming of actual soil. The garden had grown from there. By July of its 4th year, the corner lot had 6 raised vegetable beds, a small sunflower border around the perimeter, a painted mural of the Detroit skyline on the old brick wall behind it, a picnic table that had been donated by a church 3 blocks away, and a sign that read, "The Beaumont Block Garden, take what you need, get what you can." On a July afternoon so hot the air shimmered, Clara was harvesting tomatoes when a woman she'd never seen before stopped at the garden fence. The woman was young, mid-20s, maybe. She had a toddler on her hip, and the kind of tired face that speaks of more than just a hot day. "Can anyone really take things?" the woman asked. "The sign says that, but I want to make sure." "That's what it says," Clara confirmed. "Help yourself." The woman set her toddler down on the grass, a little boy who immediately became fascinated by a roly-poly bug he discovered near the fence, and she carefully picked a handful of tomatoes, a zucchini, 3 ears of corn, and a bunch of green onions. She held each thing like it mattered. "I haven't had a garden since I was at my grandmother's house," she said quietly. "She had the most beautiful okra. You know how to grow okra?" Clara asked. "I used to watch her." Clara went to a small wooden box near the back of the garden and came back with a paper envelope. "Okra seeds," she said. "You can grow them in a pot if you don't have a yard. Full sun. They love heat. which Detroit has plenty of in summer. The young woman looked at the envelope. "This is a lot of kindness from people I've never met," she said. Clara shrugged. "Most kindness comes from strangers. That's not an accident. Strangers don't have history with you. They just see you as you are, right now, in this moment." She smiled. "Sometimes that's easier to receive." The young woman planted the okra seeds 2 weeks later in a pot on her balcony. They grew. The following summer, she brought Clara a bag of okra she'd harvested and a jar of her grandmother's pickled okra recipe. They have had dinner together 4 times since. The number 37 city bus in Atlanta ran from Buckhead all the way down to East Point, through neighborhoods as different from each other as different could be, and every afternoon it carried its own particular mix of the city. Commuters with laptops, elderly women with grocery bags, teenagers with earbuds and oversized backpacks, tourists who'd chosen public transit because parking downtown was a nightmare. On a Thursday afternoon in August, the bus was unusually crowded, and the air conditioning was working at about 40% capacity, and everyone was doing what city people do in crowded hot spaces, existing in close proximity while carefully avoiding eye contact. Near the back, a man named Hector Salinas was holding a sleeping baby in one arm and a very full diaper bag in the other, trying to keep his balance as the bus lurched. His wife was in the hospital, scheduled C-section, nothing wrong, but she'd been admitted that morning and he had their 6-month-old daughter, Lucia, and he was trying to get to his mother-in-law's apartment in East Point because she was to watch the baby while he went back to the hospital, and he'd taken the bus because parking at the hospital was expensive, and he was managing so many logistics in his head simultaneously that he was about one pothole away from tears. The bus hit a pothole. Hector grabbed the overhead rail, lost the diaper bag, and Lucia woke up and started to cry. For a moment, the whole bus seemed to hold its breath. Then 3 things happened at once. A teenager named Deshaun, who'd been listening to music with his eyes closed, stood up immediately and offered his seat. A woman named Grace Kim, who was a pediatric nurse on her way home from a 12-hour shift, reached into the diaper bag that had fallen and gathered everything that had scattered across the floor: wipes, a pacifier, a small stuffed elephant, a folded receiving blanket, and handed it all back neatly. And an elderly woman named Miss Eunice, who had 7 grandchildren and had learned to read hunger and exhaustion on a father's face, pulled a small container from her grocery bag and said, "I've got oatmeal raisin cookies, baby. You need sugar." Hector sat down in Deshaun's offered seat with Lucy in his arms. The diaper bag settled at his feet, a cookie in his hand, and the strangest feeling he would later describe to his wife as being caught. "Like the whole bus just caught me," he told her. "I didn't even know I was falling." Lucia stopped crying. Deshaun stood for the remaining 14 stops without complaint. Grace got off at her stop and smiled back through the window. Miss Eunice rode all the way to East Point, sharing her cookies with whoever wanted one. Sarah Kowalski had worked the night shift at a small 24-hour pharmacy in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle for 9 years, and on the second Thursday of October, she worked her last one. She was 60 years old. Her knees hurt. She had a retirement party planned for Saturday. Her colleague had already bought the cake, carrot, because Sarah hated frosting but loved a good cake proper. On her last night, she filled 112 prescriptions. She knew the regulars by name. She knew which medications needed to be explained gently and which ones people already knew by heart. She knew which customers were nervous and which ones were in pain and which ones were just lonely and had run out of reasons to leave their apartment. And picking up a prescription was the thing that brought them out into the world. At 3 a.m., the slowest hour, a man came in that she'd never seen before. He was middle-aged, well-dressed in a rumpled sort of way, like someone who'd started the day looking put together, and the day had other ideas. He had a prescription in his hand, and a look on his face that was trying very hard to be calm. "My mother just came out of surgery," he explained when he handed over a prescription. "She's stable, but they want to get this filled now before morning." "Of course," Sarah said. "Give me 12 minutes. While she worked, she noticed he was standing at the counter with his hands flat on the glass, staring at nothing. "Is she going to be all right?" Sarah asked from behind the counter. He looked up. "They think so. She's 81. She's tough." His voice wavered slightly on that last word. 81 and tough is a very powerful combination, Sarah said. Give me something to work with, and I'll show you what I mean. She paused. Tell me about her. While I work. He blinked. Tell you about her? Yes. Tell me who she is, what she does, what she loves. While I fill this prescription, I'm a good listener, and 12 minutes is enough time for the best parts. The man, his name was Philip Hartley, and he was a structural engineer who never talked about his feelings and hadn't cried since his daughter was born, talked about his mother for 12 minutes. He talked about how she'd moved from Pittsburgh to Seattle in 1967 and started a bookkeeping business from her kitchen table, how she made pierogi from scratch every Christmas, how she called him every Sunday for 30 years without fail, how she still had opinions about everything, about his career, his haircuts, his choice of car, and how he had spent most of his adult life being mildly irritated by those opinions and would now give anything for 50 more years of them. Sarah filled the prescription, checked it twice, bagged it neatly. She slid it across the counter. She also slid across a small bag of butterscotch candies, the old-fashioned wrapped kind, the one she kept behind the counter for the long nights. These are for you, she said. Sugar helps at 3 a.m. He looked at her. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing her with me, Sarah said. She sounded extraordinary. He nodded. He picked up the bag. He paused at the door. Happy retirement, he said. He'd seen the small paper banner her colleague had taped above the counter that evening. Thank you, Sarah said. She watched him walk out into the Seattle night, and she thought, 9 years, 112 prescriptions tonight alone, thousands of people, thousands of small moments where I could have just handed over a bag and moved on, and I didn't. I stayed present. I hope it mattered. I think it did. She turned off her station light at 6 a.m. when her replacement arrived. She drove home in the gray Seattle morning. She slept deeply, the way people do when they know they've done their work well. We come back, at last, to where we started, Duluth, winter coming. Cold enough to make your breath visible from the moment you step outside. Darius Cole was now 25 years old. He was in his second year of a social work degree at the University of Minnesota Duluth, and he worked part-time at a community center in the same neighborhood where he'd grown up. He'd had a hard adolescence, not in any dramatic movie of the week way, but in the quiet, grinding way that many young people have hard adolescences. Instability at home, too much responsibility too young, a few years where the future felt like something that happened to other people. But he'd come through it because of a few things. A counselor at school who'd push him to apply to college, a job at a grocery store whose manager had been fair and consistent and had given him his first real experience of a workplace where people were treated with dignity, a friend who let him sleep on his couch for 3 months without once making him feel small, and something else, something hard to name, a kind of bedrock certainty that he carried in him like a compass point. He'd been thinking a lot lately about where it had come from. This certainty, this knowledge that people could be good, that strangers could see you. And he thought about a morning 11 years ago, a cold November morning, a bench at a bus stop, 11 degrees, a woman in a burgundy scarf who'd looked at him and not walked past. He didn't have her phone number anymore. The napkin had long since worn away at the folds, but he knew where the harbor spoon was. He'd passed it 1,000 times. He went in one morning in November, sat at the counter. A woman came over. She was older now, gray at her temples, laugh lines deep at the corners of her eyes. But she had the same way of moving through the room, steady and sure, like a person who had decided long ago exactly who she was going to be. "What can I get you, Han?" she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. Something passed across her face. Not recognition, exactly. More like the faint echo of recognition. Like seeing a song you can't quite name. "I was here once before," Darius said. "A long time ago. You made me scrambled eggs and hot chocolate." He paused. "You gave me your scarf." Marvella set down her order pad. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw what she'd always done, a human being clear and whole and present. "You were the boy at the bus stop," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She sat down across from him at the counter, something she never did during her shift, and she looked at him the way you look at something you didn't expect to be given back to you. "How are you?" she asked. Better, he said. Getting better. She nodded. That's enough. I wanted to tell you, he said carefully, that I think about that morning more than you'd think. It's been part of how I try to move through the world. The way you didn't walk past. Marvella was quiet for a moment. My grandmother taught me that, she said. She said, the people who need to be seen the most are the ones the world teaches to be invisible. She said our job is to really look and to act on what we see. Darius nodded. That's what I'm trying to do, he said. That's what I'm trying to teach. Marvella stood. She went to the kitchen. She came back with scrambled eggs, whole wheat toast with real butter, hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, and hash browns, crisp and golden at the edges, pressed flat, the way her grandmother used to make them. She put the plate in front of him. On me, she said. He laughed. Really laughed. The kind that comes in the chest. Thank you, Marvella. Don't thank me, she said. Just keep going. Run your piece. From Marvella in the cold to Darius in the classroom. From Raza's rainbow sticker to Cecily's smile in the mirror. From Gerald's bench to Alonzo's Monday night circle. From Dolores's purple notebook to Priscilla's raised hand. From Marcus's relay race to Maya's promise to herself. From Bernard's Tuesday evenings to Jalen's B+. From Clara's okra seeds to a new friendship over dinner. From a crowded bus to a sleeping baby catching her breath. From Sarah's pharmacy counter to a son who sat beside his mother as she recovered. From a cold morning in Duluth to a young man learning to pass the light forward. This is not a story about perfect people. This is a story about imperfect people, tired people, struggling people, people on their way to somewhere else, who chose in the middle of their own lives to stop for a moment, to see someone, to act. That is all kindness is. Nothing more, nothing less. It doesn't ask that you be extraordinary. It asks only that you be present, that you be willing to notice, that you be willing to act on what you see. Every single one of the people in this story changed a life, sometimes without knowing it, sometimes without ever seeing the result. Sometimes the result came back to them 11 years later, sitting at a diner counter, ordering hot chocolate, and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes you give your best sticker, and you never know what it grew into. That's okay. That's the relay race. You run your piece. So wherever you are right now, whether you're in a big city or a small town, whether you're having the best week of your life or the hardest one, whether you're running fast or barely running at all, know this. Somewhere in this country today, on a bus or a bench or a diner counter or a library backroom, someone just stopped for someone else. The ripple is still moving, and you are part of it. Thank you so much for spending this hour with me today. This story was written with one purpose: to remind us all that ordinary people doing ordinary things with extraordinary heart is the real fabric of this country and this world. If this story moved you, or made you think of someone you know, or made you want to do something small and kind today, I hope you do it. Don't wait for the perfect moment. The perfect moment is the one you're in. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. It truly helps this channel reach more people who might need a story like this today. Share it with someone who could use a gentle reminder that kindness is still everywhere. And subscribe so you never miss a new story. I'll see you next time. Take care of each other.
I'm grateful.